For this activity, we're going to be working with some acrylic paint, and I'm going to show you kind of 3 different painting styles or techniques that you can use when approaching acrylic paint. I have a circle here, but you can find anything to trace that's circular. We're going to work with just painting some spheres to get, just accustomed to the different techniques and styles with acrylic paint. So I'm going to trace my circle 3 times on my paper with pencil. So now I have 3 places where I can do some different techniques. So the first one that I'm going to show you is really just kind of a smooth blending. And then we'll work into gestural. And the last one is kind of like a blotting. So for this activity, you're going to need some paint. Now I have blue, black, and white. Now I probably have way too much paint on my palette right now, but I just didn't want to run out for demonstration. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually mix my color. Now there is this rule that you should never use a color right out of the bottle or the tube, that you should make it, a little bit different. So I'm going to lighten up my blue. So I have one of these blues that I put in my palette, and I'm just going to add a little bit of white to lighten it up. And I'm going to make sure that it's mixed. So this is going to be my base color. So what I want you to do is mix any color that you want to be your base color. So it's a little bit lighter than right out, like this almost looks black in the screen, but this is actually a blue. Alright, so I have my base color. Well, I also need kind of one that's a little bit darker, or a shade. So I'm going to take a little bit and put that kind of by my black there, but I'm also going to mix a tint, so I'm going to take a little bit more. So I've just taken some of my base color. I still have some left, which I need, but I'm also going to mix 2 different, like a tint and a shade. So rinsing off my brush so I don't contaminate my black, I'm going to take a little bit of black and add it to this blue mixture. So that creates a little bit of a darker version that compared to what I originally had. I'm going to make it a little bit darker. I don't want it to be pure black. I do want to still see some of the blue. So that is a shade. Now with this one, I need to make a tint, which is lighter. So I'm going to rinse off my brush. And I'm going to add a considerable amount of white. So this is a big old blob of white that I'm going to add to it. So it takes a lot of white to make a difference. So that's starting to lighten it up. I'm going to take a little bit more. And I didn't rinse my brush, so look, I contaminated my paint. That's okay. So I'm just making sure that it's all mixed together. Okay, so I have my base color, which is the first color I mixed. I have a tint of it, and then I have a shade of it. So those are the 3 things I'm going to need to begin with this whole painting business. So the first thing I'm going to do with every single one of these is I'm going to paint a base coat on each one. So I'm going to take my base color and I'm going to just paint it flat. I'm not even going to worry about shading or if it looks 3D or anything like that. Alright, so I have a base coat there for my smooth one. I'm going to do the same thing for gesture and blotting. So with anything that you're painting, you should always do a base coat. Whatever color is going to be like the main color, that should be your base coat. It's always going to take at least 2 coats to coat your painting well. And if you start with a base coat, then you're less likely to have unwanted white spaces showing through. So our main goal is going to be making these things look like they are 3D, like they are spheres on our page. That's going to be our goal, and we're going to use the different techniques to achieve our goal. So I'm going to designate my light source, right? So my lightest area is going to be over on this side. Now this has started to dry, but it's not completely dry yet. That's okay, we can work with it wet or dry. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my highlight color and I'm going to put it where my light area is. Now this is my smooth one, so I'm going to want to make sure that I have smooth blending. So my light color is blending in a little bit with the color, my first color, so it's actually not nearly as light as I need it to be. So I'm going to add another coat. And I might have to go back and add some white to it, and that's okay. But I'm not going to do that yet. Now I don't want just like this floating spot here that's not blended out. So I'm going to rinse my brush. There's a lot of rinsing in this activity, and wipe it off. I'm going to take that original color and put it right next to that spot, the lighter spot that I just did. I'm going to go all the way around it. Now I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to dry off my brush. And so I'm going to use a brush that has nothing on it, and I'm going to blend those two together. Now, anytime you feel like there's too much paint that you're not able to blend, wipe it off a little bit and come back to it. So now I don't have this like floating light dot there. Notice how it's kind of blending out. And that's what I want. I want smooth blending, so I don't want any, you know, whenever we're looking at a sphere, it's not going to have this like big floating dot on it. Now I'm going to do the same thing with my shadowed area. I'm going to put my darker color where my darker side is. I'm carefully getting it around that edge. I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to take that original color I started with and put it right next to it. Now I'm going to rinse my brush again, wipe it off real good, and then use that dry brush to blend those two together. So I'm starting to build up an area that looks like a shadowed area, and I'm starting to build up a highlight, but I don't feel like it's quite there yet. So with this next step, again, with acrylic paint, it's always in layers. I'm actually going to take some pure white, and I'm going to put pure white on here. Now it's still wet, so it's going to mix with that blue color, and that's okay. Now I don't want just a circle just camping out there. I definitely need to blend it out. So I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to take some of my tint and put it around it. So really what I'm doing here is just strengthening my highlights. And then I'm going to take this original color and put it around it. Alright, now I'm going to rinse my brush, dry it off real good, and I'm going to blend that together. Now again, anytime you feel like your brush is overloaded, wipe it off a little bit so you can blend a little bit better. So I would say out of all the ones that we're learning today, the smooth blending takes the longest. And it's probably the most difficult because you want it to be perfectly smooth, and so you're taking a long time trying to get that perfectly smooth and blended. Okay, so I have a distinct highlight and I have a distinct shadow. Now I'm going to want to do some sort of shadow underneath. So typically a shadow is an ellipse that kind of juts out from there. Now I'm actually going to do just a black shadow underneath here. Now depending on your light source, your shadow can be strong like this one, or it can fade out too. It really depends on what kind of light source you have. So if this is like a ball that's outside in the sun, you're going to have a very distinct light source. If you're inside, typically you have more than one light source, and so your shadows are like kind of fading out and not as distinct. Alright, so let's look at our gestural. Now the same thing with gestural is this, it's going to be very similar to what we just did. However, it's going to go quicker because we're not going to be as picky about if our blending is perfect and that kind of stuff. But we're still going to do really a very similar process. So I'm still going to use all of my same colors. This one's a little bit drier though than what this one was when I started. So I'm going to put my highlight color with the same places I did before. I'm going to rinse my brush. And then I'm going to come in with that original color. But I'm a lot looser. Notice I'm not being as picky. Like if it gets on my highlight or whatever, I'm just kind of very quickly doing it. So with gestural, you're appreciating your brush strokes. You're not really being super picky about if everything is blended. Because with gestural, typically if you're away from a painting, it's going to blend, your eye is going to blend it anyway. So it's really about just like kind of leaving your brush strokes and not being so picky. So there I put my shadow color or my shade, and now I'm coming in with that original color and just very quickly taking my original color and trying to blend it in. So that was my first coat. I feel like I need to do another coat. For this one, I'm going to start with white, just like I did on the other side. Kind of taking that white and pulling it out a little bit. Again, I'm appreciating my brush strokes and not getting rid of all my brush strokes. Now I'm going to take that lighter color and add some of the lighter color and blend it in. Maybe some of the original color. And then some of the shadow color. I definitely don't rinse my brush nearly as much whenever I'm doing gestural. I kind of let it all just blend together. So much quicker, much freer, but a lot less controlled. Alright, so for the last one, I need to talk about my shadow in this one. So I'm going to do, instead of what I did over here where it was like very distinct shadow, I'm going to mix a gray and just do kind of a blended out shadow. So I'm going to put a shadow down underneath here. Now typically in a painting you don't see different styles. You'll see the same style kind of used throughout. So if I use gestural up on top, I need to use gestural on the bottom too. So I'm going to take in some white and just kind of fade that out as if it was a ball that was inside and I have multiple light sources. So something like that is kind of like a freer shadow compared to this one that's very restricted. Okay, so the last one is blotting. Again, I'm going to do the same thing, but instead of brushing my paint on, it's more of a pushing it on, okay? So I'm going to start by taking my lighter color and it's like I'm dabbing it onto the surface. I always think of this one as kind of like you're looking at whatever your subject is kind of through one of those textured glasses, like, like textured glass. All right, I'm going to take my original color and then put that on there in the same kind of motion. all the way around, but bringing it right on top of my shadow, so I'm blending as I'm blotting. And then I'm going to take some of my shadow color, my shade, and put that. Now the one thing that I have a hard time with this one is keeping my edges nice and crisp. Yeah, it's really difficult to do. So I'm going to bring it right on top of that other color and have it start to blend in. I'm rinsing my brush. I felt like it was starting to get overloaded and kind of muddy. I'm going to put my bring some of that shade underneath a little bit. Now I feel like I need to bring back my highlight, so I'm going to add some white. And I'm just kind of blotting it out and just kind of blending it out. Alright, so that's blotting, which goes very, very quick, I feel like, compared to the smooth blending that I was like, felt like I was doing that forever. Now, with the shadow, I'm going to do a shadow in the same style that I did my sphere. So I'm going to do some blotting. So I'm going to put down a darker color, and then I'm going to blend it out with a little bit of white. And we'll start mixing with the other color. I'm going to bring back that darker gray. Just kind of fade it out. Alright, so there you have it. You have smooth blending, which is pretty time consuming, but it's all blended, looks nice. We have gestural, where you appreciate your brush strokes, goes a little bit quicker, and blotting.